This is Jim Semivan, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. And a returning guest joins me today. I have independent filmmaker and researcher to discuss his latest documentary, Transmedium, Puerto Rico's UFOs, Mr. Darcy Weir. Darcy, welcome back.
Hey Andy, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on. I think I've just embarrassed myself by subconsciously doing the accent when I said Puerto Rico. So if anyone out there thinks I've put that on, that's just slipped out. Okay.
I think the Puerto Ricans would appreciate it. Don't worry about it.
That's good. It's better than the Scottish way of just saying Puerto Rico, which I'm sure is butchering it. But yeah, Puerto Rico. Darcy, your latest documentary, you've made several of these now, and if people haven't heard our previous shows, go back and check those out. Just type Darcy Weir into any of the search engines where you find the podcast, and you'll find those. But very quickly, Darcy, for people who haven't heard those and aren't familiar with you and your background, do you want to give us a little snapshot of who you are?
Sure. Bird's eye view. I've just been producing documentary research films into the UFO phenomenon since 2012. The very first documentaries focused on people like Phil Schneider, and then I kind of did a transition from that and did like cryptid documentaries on like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and back into UFOs. I did an abduction documentary called Being Taken and interviewed Stanton Friedman, Kathleen Martin, Travis Walton. So I've been doing it for a little while. The last series I think you interviewed me about was more NASA based, like secret space UFOs, kind of looking into a history of NASA's possible involvement in covering up UFO encounters in space. There seems to be a lot of that. Nowadays, space is completely filled with junk and satellites, and it's a competitive field for getting telecommunications and stuff into orbit. But back in the day, space was pretty, it was a untouched frontier. It was a clean frontier. And yeah, so I documented a bunch of stuff, and pretty much I'm a UFO guy. I really like to look into UFO footage, UFO sighting stories, and experiencer stories, and just try to bring as much information to the forefront about that.
Yeah, just in touching on the nature of those documentaries, you've kind of gone from the land, you've gone into space, and I think this one we start to come right back down to earth and almost splash down in the water. There's a lot of focus in this documentary, but we'll get to that. I want to know the inspiration for why Puerto Rico as a focus, not just UFOs, not South American, North American. You've gone straight for a very specific place, and what was the thinking?
Yeah, well, I've always been fascinated with UFO stories that come out of different areas of the world. Obviously, a lot of them come from the United States, but they're not only happening in the United States. They happen in the UK, as you know, Canada, Brazil, China, Russia, Australia, you name it. And I have done some film work before with Jaime Maussan and focused on some more Mexico stories. So I've always been interested in the Latin American culture and stories that emanate from there. And when I was working on my the previous release to this documentary, which is called Transmedium, Fast Movers and USOs, I got to sit down with Tim Gallaudet, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, former. I got to sit down with Richard Dolan again, and Chris Stiles, and many of these other very, subject matter experts on USO and ocean-based UFO encounters. And one of the people that I spoke to in that documentary was Andy Marcial. Now, Andy Marcial is a Puerto Rican. He was born there. He had his first sighting of a UFO in Puerto Rico as a kid. And his sightings of UFOs inspired him to create like a Instagram social media presence called NYUAP Discussion. Through that, he ended up getting the attention of a Department of Homeland Security agent named Bob. And they started speaking back and forth. And Bob shared with him three really prevalent UAP videos that came out of DHS observations on operation. Mm-hmm. And their FLIR camera, their forward-looking infrared video. Andy leaked that footage through his social media presence, you know, kind of blew up on Twitter. There was lots of words expressed from trolls and lots of people. Yeah, there was a lot of negativity expressed to him. And I wanted to kind of like cover a bit of that story at the end of the documentary, just because the community itself is its own worst enemy. There's a lot of people that stand on a milk crate and take down other people. And then there's, you know, incredible stories that are overlooked. And I felt like the DHS videos that came out through Andy were quite overlooked. And I wanted to know his experience interacting with the UFO community when he first came out. And through just working with him on that, we started talking about where he came from, which is Puerto Rico, and how that has this rich history of UFO and USO encounters. So kept in touch. He was kind of like plugging me with ideas, and then he actually gave me the email for a pretty famous Puerto Rican native who is a UFO journalist, let's say, kind of like the George Knapp of Puerto Rico. His name's Jorge Martin. And I reached out to him. He got back to me. We started communicating over the phone quite regularly. And over 6 months, we planned the eventual arrival of Andy and I to investigate Puerto Rico and look into some really interesting stories there.
Yeah, lots you touched on there I'm going to get to in the interview, definitely. I could talk about that concept of the UFO community, because I think some people get that confused as if it's, and I said this the other week talking to Dan, I can't remember if it was on the pod, but I've said this before, it's like, if the UFO community was a huge hotel, people think that because you're making noise in room 216 down on the second floor, that people up in the penthouse or the 7th floor or on the other side of the building can hear you, and they can't. But they can make so much noise, you can just wake up the neighbors sometimes. And like you say, some people think their rooms are more important than others, and that's not always the case. So, but I appreciate that a little bit of noise can go a long way, especially on social media, and that can kind of reverberate around as well. But I do remember that at the time. I want to know, though, you mentioned that getting to Puerto Rico. I wonder, what's the perception of the UFO conversation in Puerto Rico? I get the feeling just from watching you speak to the locals, speaking to Jorge and others who appear on the documentary, and just from the testimony and stories that they share, it's a phenomenon that's just accepted and is openly discussed.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, actually. A lot of people there equate UFOs and maybe non-human intelligence encounters with like angels and demons, which, you know, is reflective of the greater population of the world anyways. So because it's usually related to like demonic or evil things, it is a bit of a taboo subject. Jorge has been covering the beat more in like a nuts and bolts encounters way for like 4 decades. But he's gotten a lot of resistance from that, not only from like local broadcasters and such, but just from communities, like the religious community and stuff. They are very, you know, religious island, let's say. But they have just a rich history of sightings. And the people that did agree to speak to us, you know, they were hesitant. They were worried that they might get, you know, stigmatized and treated a certain way and so on. So it took a bit of time to convince them to meet with us, especially the Department of Homeland Security, like the CBP agent that we ended up meeting with, who leaked the Aguadilla 2013 UAP footage. That guy, you know, we planned to meet him maybe the first day that we arrived, and it took like 3 days after we arrived till we finally met with him. So, you know, that just shows, and he didn't want to be shown on screen or his name or anything shared, just due to his professional work and probably the community.
And just touching on the island itself, you mentioned it's not too far, is it, from the Bermuda Triangle? And the Bermuda Triangle actually is made up of, I had to check this, Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the southeastern tip of the triangle, so it's pretty close to a rather famous, you know, mystery.
Yeah, it's like that whole ocean area is steeped in mystery because there's just been so many encounters or missing ships, missing planes, missing submarines, like the USS Scorpio. This has been happening for decades. So what's going on there, right? And Puerto Ricans have been seeing all kinds of really strange stuff on the island there. So we covered 3 pretty interesting stories and subjects that we met in this documentary. But, you know, that's just scratching the surface. There's a national rainforest called the Junque National Rainforest in the center of the island. The island itself is the Sierra, let's say, of a giant ocean mountain. And on top of it is just lush jungle everywhere, except for like the city of San Juan and some other larger cities, right? So the forest has had its own, let's say, Roswell crash incident that, you know, NASA apparently was located there right after this crash happened in the forest. And they were using some strange type of radar plane flying in circles over the island for like weeks. Jorge covered that story. There was UFOs for decades in the 80s, 90s, seen flying out of the forest and into the forest, into the ocean, out of the ocean. People have seen what we would describe as like non-human intelligence, like entities of strange looks coming from the forest when national forest rangers and stuff are moving through it on their own. And so there's just so many weird stories that come out of Puerto Rico. It seems like a highly anomalous island.
So that Aguadilla video, as we know it, do you want to talk about that? That's one of the centerpieces of the documentary. I think it's the one social media will know best, and you've got all those other stories that fill in around it. But for anyone who hasn't seen that video, do you want to talk us through exactly what it looks like and what was happening?
Yeah, sure. So the 2013 Aguadilla footage is now famous, has been for a while. It's been brought up in Lou Elizondo's recent book again. And the Center for Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, I think it's Robert Powell and a bunch of other scientists there did a really extensive take and analysis of that video, and they think it's like the smoking gun. It's like this UAP that exhibits, you know, the 5 observables, basically. It's operating. When the video started, the CBP agent that we spoke to said that the FLIR camera operator on the plane had noticed it, but the pilots and the ground crew and the control tower that were working at that time at the Rafael Hernandez Airport could not see it with their naked eye, this object. You would see a Mylar balloon, you would see a bird or something if it was like a normal 3D object, right? But this was only being picked up by the FLIR camera operator. And when they reached out to the pilot to ask and the control tower to see like what's going on, can you see this thing that I'm picking up? They said no. They were about to land, and they decided to stay up and the FLIR, so that the FLIR camera operator could track this object. And it's a 4-minute video. It's just a little bit less than 4 minutes. And essentially, the object had come from the ocean. It does a circle around the airport, around some neighborhoods, like houses that are encroaching on the edge of the airport. And then it goes over the beach, over the ocean, into the ocean, and it looks like it separates into 2 objects and then fly off. And at that point, it somehow completely eludes the tracking of the FLIR camera. Now, I know that there's going to be a heavy debunking coming out probably later this year from a major scientific organization in the media. And they're going to use a NASA scientist to try and prove that. But, you know, again, it's pretty obvious that NASA, I think, is part of the cover-up. They're like the modern-day Condon Committee. But anyways, in that video, you're seeing it hit the ocean. Basically, it separates, you know, all these things that seem to show intelligent control. And it is not a bird. It is not a Mylar balloon, because these would have been observed. And after that footage was recorded, they changed the access procedures for personnel on the airport, you know, area. CBP agents were not allowed to communicate with other staff, and they really sort of segregated things off after that. Apparently, the FBI got involved to find out how the video got leaked to the public. And there is a standing order within the Department of Homeland Security right now that agents are not allowed to record things with their phones. They're not allowed to release any Department of Homeland Security data out to the public in any way. So things have really changed over the recent years in terms of, like, basically those videos, the Aguadilla footage, the A-10 Warthog and La Bruja and all that type of stuff. There's no way that that stuff would get out to the public right now. They would be considered classified in the current legal conditions for DHS.
On a sidebar, and I know Andy's not here to discuss this, but it was discussed at length at the time, but people who are maybe newer to this might not know, but is there anything that you can see as being questionable as why content like this, regardless of what it shows, because we'll say it's anomalous, would have been leaked to someone anyways? And I don't just mean, that's not disrespectful to Andy, but a guy who has his own Twitter account or Instagram account or TikTok, regardless of number of followers, the same way, if that was leaked to me, you know, some lowly podcaster gets some some guy gives it to me, that's going to raise questions anyway. So for you, what's the thinking around that? And do you question even the motives behind that being released to Andy?
No, I don't think there's any like nefarious or like, you know, intelligence op based around the release of this footage. I think it's literally somebody who's interested in the subject that has worked within these departments or agencies, and they want to get the information out to see if it changes the world, you know, changes our global consciousness in some way. We wouldn't be talking about UFOs and UAPs so openly today on mass media unless it was for the release of like the 2017 footage, the Tic Tac, the gimbal, you know, the Go Fast, all that stuff, which has been debunked by Aero and NASA. But, you know, I don't think it's a good debunk job. I think it's just a cover up in a way in the media. And they're going to do the same thing eventually to this footage, Department of Homeland Security, because that's the loose end footage right now. They don't like it being in the public consciousness as possibly something anomalous. And I think, you know, I've said this before in other interviews, you know, what people say, why did Jeremy Corbell get this footage or that footage, you know, the 2019 triangle swarm footage over a carrier out on the West Coast, or why did he get footage that was released to him of like the
jellyfish,
the jellyfish or the Mosul orb? I think the Mosul orb is more. I really like the Mosul orb picture and short clip. I think the reason why he gets that footage is because, again, there's people within the defense military sort of sections, walk of life, and they somehow got to see this footage, and they want that to be out there because they know if this gets out there, it's going to change the way people think about our reality. And the same thing goes for why Bob gave Andy that footage. Bob, you know, is at the end of his tenure working at DHS. He believes that there's a cover-up. He believes that there's UFOs being seen by not only our military, but also Department of Homeland Security, which is a, you know, defense-ish like security agency for the United States. And he just wanted to do his part to get that footage out to the public. Well, he still can, because he's also very sick. And, you know, people tend to get these like paranoid, super fearful thoughts in our community that end up turning into attacks of character and end up being used against people within, you know, this sort of disclosure movement. And unfortunately, that's not fair, because there might be a true story here where people are trying to do the right thing, and they're not like looking for fame, looking for money, or running an operation on the community to deceive everyone. I think the deception is obviously coming from the powers that be. You know, it's in their best interests to defame the people or sources that this footage comes from.
And I think even the most recent example of that sort of discrediting was the attempt on David Grush after he came out and said what he said, where I won't name the journalist, but everyone knows the name probably listening who was around for the story, managed to get a hold of information, really sensitive information, very quickly about David Grush's past that would have been nigh on impossible to get within a couple of weeks, let alone days. And that became a major news story. So it's not like there's no precedent for that sort of thing happening out there in the media.
Yeah, it was leaked illegally in a way from the DOD to, this journalist. And I think that happens over and over and over again. I mean, like, Lou's been attacked. Andy has been attacked, his credibility was put into question right away. Why does that happen? Why is that the common theme? Why are ideas pumped into the community to take down people that are like saying, hey, look at this, there's something really credible here, and it'll happen to me, it'll happen to you, it'll happen to everybody that's trying to push this idea forward in some way. Not to say that there isn't people out there that are hucksters and grifters and, charlatans just trying to pull attention to themselves. But I don't see that with the Aguadilla footage. I don't see that with Andy or, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet or Lou Elizondo or, a bunch of these people that have been accused of that type of stuff. I don't think they deserve that.
I think one of the best ways to combat that, though, and this is aimed at that quote-unquote community for everyone, is you've got people on one extreme who are looking to debunk everything, and there's an explanation, X, Y, and Z, but we have to admit that quite often there probably is a reason or prosaic explanation, or maybe it's some secret government tech, etc., etc. I think on the flip side, if the folks who are pro-disclosure, pro-progress, pro-UAP, whatever you want to call it, we could be a bit better at admitting when we are wrong. And if footage does come out saying, actually, it's been debunked or we've found out what this is, and be able to say, fantastic, that's fine. Disproving one piece of footage doesn't disprove the entire UFO topic.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very...
Proving one piece will prove the entire UFO topic, but...
Yeah, it works a little bit more like a landslide if one piece of footage truly is, operated by a non-human intelligence. Well, there you go. We're not alone, right?
Yeah.
But that's the really hard thing to prove, and I think no one wants that to be proven. There's a lot at stake, I think, for the key players that have been covering this up for a long time. But yeah, I mean, debunkers, their shtick is to debunk, and they fall into that pattern so often that even if something was incredibly real and all the data was right in front of their face to prove it, that's just not their shtick. They're not going to accept that as truth. Their truth is, this is BS, right?
Yeah.
And, that's fine. I'm skeptical about a lot of stuff in the UFO community. And I've been vocal about some of that stuff. And I've been attacked because there's people that want to die on that cross. They can't see the argument on the other side that could disprove the box that their mind is in. So it happens both ways. And there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. But I choose to think that there's a lot of real stuff going on, and I'm trying to cover some of that stuff.
I think what helps with this is one of the former guests way back at the time this footage came out. I had Dave Falch. Is it Falch? Falk?
Yeah, Dave Falch. It's like falling.
Yeah, I remember speaking to him at the time and trying to get that. So Dave Falch, and he's on the documentary, obviously, and he's an expert when it comes to FLIR analysis as well. He was a FLIR tech. And he still is, yeah. And he's got a YouTube channel where he explains this kind of stuff as well, which is really great. And he talks on the documentary, and I think the main thing for me as a layman, because I don't say I'm an expert in this topic in any way, shape, or form, and I can't look at FLIR footage and pretend to know what everything on that screen means. I take it face value when, quote unquote experts tell me what something is, and they could all say different things, and you have to kind of make up your own mind depending on what kind of data set is put in front of you. But the thing for me with this is, when the object goes into the water, as Dave quite rightly says, or I'm assuming he's correct, it appears to stay the same speed and maintain its velocity. So an object that we would have, and there are drones that are transmedium. There are drones that can go from air into water, and we have vehicles that can do that. They lose elements of performance depending on what their main, medium is supposed to be. So for this object to stay so true, head to the water, come down, maintain velocity, come back out the water, and then it does the, incredible thing of seeming to split or duplicate or whatever it may be. That to me is the real interesting piece of the footage, because before that, regardless of being an expert in anything, I could watch that and go, maybe that is a balloon just floating on by in the air. That can be explained in different ways, and then people will tell you why it's not. But then when you see it do that into the water, that's, wait a minute, if that's a balloon, that's stopping, that's not coming back out the water, not at the same speed, it's not going in. And so that's the real interesting thing for me on that. And does that strike you in that particular piece of footage, or have you got something else that really stands out?
Well, there's the eyewitnesses that were there that couldn't see it, which is one of the oddities about UFO encounters. Often people say that they'll be invisible and then they'll appear and then they'll kind of like disappear. But FLIR footage is what, our human eye can't even see in. And I documented in the NASA doc series that I was doing, NASA was recording space-based video with forward-looking ultraviolet cameras, which are impossible to get in a consumer version, really. Especially like if you think about what NASA's cameras are, they're like $100,000 cameras, especially back then, that were on like the shuttles and stuff. So these are extensions, these are technologies that enhance our ability to look at the world around us, because our eyes can't even see in those light spectrums. And Dave Falch, he mentions his own UFO encounter where he was repairing FLIR camera systems at work, and his workmate called him over, and they were observing an object that was in the sky that was not visible to their human eye. It seemed like it was close enough to be. And then when they would switch to the regular color band, from red to purple, let's say, in our normal light spectrum, they couldn't see it either, but it was there in FLIR and then it disappeared. But that type of thing seems to be a commonality in UAP footage. And I think with this object going into the ocean, disappearing, that whole transmedium aspect where people have observed, obviously, the word transmedium and UAP is something that's been thrown around within our Department of Defense, our intelligence communities for some time now. And in the previous documentary, Fast Movers and USOs, I mentioned, the debrief article where they uncovered through Freedom of Information Act request, UAP conversations happening over email between Navy personnel, and they were discussing the transmedium capabilities of UAP, which are being observed by the Department of Defense and their different layers, their Navy in this regard. We're seeing objects entering the ocean and exiting the ocean as if the ocean wasn't there, as if they were just flying through the atmosphere, unimpeded by typical frictions, that a water skiing boat or something like that flying across the ocean, or a lake, you have that friction, the ocean becomes a solid. These craft just omit that. And if you're seeing this footage of the Aguadilla 2313 object go into the ocean and the speed doesn't reduce, it shows that this thing is also going transmedium, like these reports from Navy men. And specifically, it was a triangular object that I was covering in the first doc that was seen exiting the ocean, flying above an F-18 fighter pilot, and then shooting off. And, you know, that's just stuff that's been circulating within that world for a while now, and we're only starting to hear about it more often now.
This might be frustrating for you as a director and filmmaker, but it almost seems like the stuff we have on video is the boring and mundane stuff. When you hear the testimony from like the fishermen, and I've seen this in other documentaries set in different places. Fishermen have all these incredible stories of things. Well, they've been working away. It could be day, it could be night, out in the oceans, and they see these incredible things come out the water. Now, they don't have camera phones in their pockets necessarily, given what they're doing, the way they're working, the conditions they're working in. But again, you hear and see that in the documentary, that this stuff's happening all the time. It's not a few isolated incidents that have been caught on camera. It's almost like the exception to the rule is people have cameras on them. The rest of the time, these things happen quite often, don't they?
Yeah. It seems that the ocean, you know, is a hotbed for activity. I was talking to Sean Cahill recently. He was telling us about the Nimitz encounter and how that happened for days. And there was like flotillas of these Tic Tacs going, flying from 80,000 feet to the ocean surface and then actually going into the ocean after hovering for a bit. And they were coming down in sets. And when they would go, it was around Catalina Island, right? And when he was working on a television series out in that direction, out on the West Coast, he and the crew that were on these ships heading over to Catalina Island saw what looked like almost like serpents in the water that were not fish. They were like emitting light and going around the boat. There was a UFO encounter where they saw an object off the boat there going into the water. So there are certain hotspots, I think, around the world. Definitely off the coast of California there is a prevalent place for encounters. I think the Bermuda Triangle is an area that we've had a lot of recorded history, strange things happening there, even going back to the days of Christopher Columbus. But people, yeah, have cameras now in their phones that record in 4K. And I would hope that more people record this footage going forward. I know, again, like that footage that Jeremy Corbell got from 2019 that was on top of a ship where they're recording these triangles in I think it was like night vision. That was essentially like, I think, a monocular that was night vision that was being put up to a phone, a cell phone. And at this point, I think there's like a standing order that that type of stuff cannot be conducted. Navy men and people that are at sea are not allowed anymore to record on their cell phones because they don't want that material hitting the public.
Do you think it's as simple as there are underwater, and this goes from the realms of nuts and bolts to some pretty wild theory, but that there are underwater bases with non-human intelligence in and around islands like Catalina, Puerto Rico, all over South America, North America, and elsewhere in the world? And I wonder how much of the conversations you've had with like a Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet has influenced that opinion. Yeah,
I mean, I asked him point blank, does he think that there's ocean-based structures? And he said, yes, I do. And I was blown away that like a former Rear Admiral for the Navy, chief oceanographer for 7 years, would state that to me. But this is a credible individual. This is a person that's a scientist, you know, and understands the oceans really well, and knows that The oceans could hold all kinds of secrets. It's 71% of our planet is covered with, and we're not in the ocean most of the time. You know, we stay away from it. We're on land. So it's a perfect place to take shelter if you have the technology and want to stay out of sight, out of sound. I think, was it Mark Knuth that you had on?
Kevin Knuth.
Kevin Knuth, yeah. I've heard him speak about, you know, the realities in science that the ocean could be here and on other planets a perfect place to create a controlled environment, right? It has everything you need in terms of, like, if you wanted to generate oxygen, you could separate that from the water. If you wanted to create some kind of fuel like hydrogen, you can separate that from the water. You could mine at the bottom of an ocean. You could pull resources like different types of ores and diamonds and whatever you really want. You could even pull basically deep sea geothermal energy from the bottom of an ocean. It's just whether your technology could withstand those pressures. Ours, in order for us to go down to the bottom of an ocean, we have to use deep submersibles, which are very, like, specifically made to withstand the depths of the ocean floor. And you know, James Cameron's been down to the bottom of ocean trenches. I think Deep One is one of the craft, and Victor Vescovo, who's a explorer and very wealthy businessman, he's been to the bottom of the ocean many times in his deep submersible. But it's like a one max two-man crew in these craft because they're super small. You can't take a Navy submarine as we know it that has like a crew of 20 to 50 or, you know, more personnel on board. It's just not possible. So it's a challenge for us to get down there, and therefore it could be an opportunity to, you know, stay secret and stay hidden from the world.
Now, you've made a few documentaries now, not only on like cryptids and whatnot, but just on the UFO topic. And I wonder, from the early days to now, has much of your opinion on the UFO topic changed?
I mean, probably 10 years ago, if you asked me where UFOs were coming from, I thought like outer space. And, you know, nowadays I'm like, maybe some of it's ours. Maybe some of it is, you know, a futuristic human that is coming back in time in a time machine to observe our timeline. I don't know, like some of it might be extraterrestrial. And then this whole crypto-terrestrial theory, has there been a non-human intelligence existing here just as long or maybe even longer than us that, you know, lives underground or lives in the oceans? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's what we're, maybe that's why when people ask when Lou Elizondo or these other thought leaders in the subject right now are asked on mass media interviews, you know, are they aliens? They're very reluctant to say that. Or maybe that's why Arrow has an escape in calling it an alien or extraterrestrial explanation.
No proof of ET, because what does ET mean? Like technically,
maybe it's something that is terrestrial. We just don't understand it. It's from like a shadow biosphere that we can't even perceive properly.
Yeah, no, I can buy into that. Darcy, can we finish off with some listener questions?
Sure.
Thank you to everyone who sent stuff over. I won't get through them all. Some of them you'll have heard answered in the body of the interview. But get straight into these, Darcy. So Spenny asks, in Darcy's early work, he uses NASA's own transcripts to make a case that there is non-human intelligence on the moon. What is Darcy's and your opinion about the true nature of the moon and the likelihood of NHI activity?
I think the moon is very anomalous comparatively to other moons around the solar system. So it seems to be kind of unique. The Chapel Bell experiment made back in, I think, a few decades ago, it was a DoD joint NASA operation where they crashed a satellite into, or something into the surface of the moon. And they said that the moon rang like a bell because it was very hollow, right? So that means something is in there. I think that there are structures on the moon that seem to be almost like relic bases, like maybe from a ancient civilization or something. To me, it would make sense that we live in like a chaos system on the planet and in our solar system. And maybe like mankind is older than we even can understand, but we kind of go through these reset cycles. Maybe that's what's happened on the moon, or straight up, maybe there's a non-human intelligence that uses that as a base. I don't know, but I know that the transcripts, the DAC motion picture footage, the old Hasselblad SLR cameras that were used to record observations and commentary while the astronauts were floating around the moon or landing on the moon seem to point to something anomalous being up there that surprised the astronauts, you know? I don't know what it is, but your guess is as good as mine. I'm just open to something anomalous being there that shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said there I would echo. I think there's definitely been things documented from the moon, like you say, astronauts arriving there and saying something's watching them from a crater. They were there already. They're huge. The whole dark side of the moon phenomenon being an interesting thing. There are potentially relics or structures on there which would be mind-blowing if we could get private industry into space that didn't have connections to government. That could.
I think that's impossible. I think because space is like the most protected realm, just because you get an advantage militarily, you could drop nuclear bombs from space in a like split second. Russia's been kind of bragging about that type of thing as a option to strike the West if they wanted. There's just, and yeah, I just think that the military runs that show, and you know, NASA being up there is just an extension. They're like the smartest, you know, research agency for the military of the West, right? So I don't think it's possible for you to be a new Elon Musk without signing a deal with the Department of Defense that whatever you see up there is classified and all the information you collect is not allowed to be released to the public.
That's my issue though with Elon Musk and others doing Virgin Galactic were going to do it, weren't they, unsuccessfully at the minute, like private, you know, commercial trips into space. And I always use the example flippantly, but it's true. If you put Kanye West in space with an iPhone and something goes by his window, are you keeping Kanye West quiet? Are you keeping Taylor Swift quiet? If all these billionaires that would go up there, you know, someone's going to see something if there's stuff up there. but space is
sure.
a big place as well. So it's certainly an interesting one. Russell asks, my understanding of the movement in water is that the speed that was done in the air is maintained and no wake is generated. Does Darcy know if there have been opportunities to study if vegetation is disturbed, such as seaweed or similar?
The last part of that question was about seaweed. Sorry, what was that?
So, like with these objects not creating any wake in the water, wondering if if these objects are underwater, has there been opportunity to study if things like vegetation and seaweed are disturbed by these objects, or they stay totally still, there's no effects, for example?
Yeah, I guess like similar to, say, the Travis Walton incident, where the trees around where the object was seen kind of grow differently now.
Yeah,
that's
biological effects, I'm guessing, yeah, but on vegetation and such.
I do not know of any. That would be pretty cool, though, to find something that points to that. I mean, if these things do emit some kind of radiation that's been documented, like this novel radiation signature, plasma related, I would assume that they would still exhibit that radiation in the ocean. Although the ocean, water is a radiation insulator, right? When we finish using uranium rods or plutonium, we bury them in the ground surrounded by water, because the water adds an extra layer of containment for radiation leaks. So I don't know if that would, I don't know if I think radiation might even dissipate in the ocean if an object was passing through it. It's a good question.
Might be a good study for any kind of USO type documentaries that come up in future. Maybe I could something like that in there. Johnny asks, or here's Johnny, says, does Darcy think disclosure will see the light of day, despite all of the extraordinary traction that's been made on the subject, but with the ever-increasing shutdown of freedom of speech and so-called conspiracy theories being deemed as harmful, alternative social media deplatforming, and the general quash on what we get to see and hear, are we going to fall short of the finish line?
I think every form of disclosure is different to people out there. There's a lot of people that are going to be unhappy with any version of disclosure because it's not what they want, right? They want to know, are there reptilians? Are the Nordics living among us? Like all that type of stuff, right? And that's like really deep dive theory stuff. For me, disclosure is a success if it's being, if there's laws that are currently being discussed within Congress in the United States, which is the most powerful country of the world, and it's being taken seriously by mass media for the first time in history. That is a huge step forward. And it could lead to an eventual full admission that we're not alone in the universe, and whatever this intelligence is that's interacting with our planet could be a plethora of things. I think that is a success to some degree because it opens up our minds to newer things and allows us to approach this phenomenon with new scientific endeavor and scrutiny than ever before, because we were acting as if we were the Catholic Church and Galileo or Copernicus was saying that, the Earth is not the center of the universe. For a long time, UFOs have just been, explained as nothing, and they still are to some degree. There's some people you can't do anything to convince them otherwise. But I think there is a bit of a sea change happening here with our global consciousness and any sort of disclosure that comes from the president or the government that serves under these people is a huge breakthrough, in my opinion.
And Cam asked, great question to finish off with. What is the release date of the new documentary? So I think given it's out already for folks to get a hold of, do you want to let people know how they can watch and get a hold of the work?
Yeah, sure. This doc is, it's out now. It's on Apple TV, like Xbox, Google Play, a whole bunch of other Vudu, like Fandango now, a bunch of different streaming platforms. I have actually another doc that's going to be a little bit controversial that's coming out later this year. It's a 2-part series that's just been accepted. So look out for my work. Really appreciate people checking my stories out, and yeah, stay vigilant.
Awesome. Darcy, what's one thing I forgot to ask you? If people watch this documentary, what do you hope they take away from it?
I just hope that they understand that there's people from all walks of life experiencing this phenomenon in different ways that's very impactful. And, that could be people from our security and defense. It could be people that are just mainstream civilians like you and I that are seeing this stuff with our own eyes, or maybe even meeting non-human entities. It's very interesting. And I just want people to understand that there's a possibility of truth to this.
Awesome. Folks, go and check out Transmedium, Puerto Rico's UFOs. And if you've not heard those other interviews with myself and Darcy, go back and check those out. He's done lots of great interviews on other channels as well, Disclosure Team with Vinny and the like. So yeah, check those out. Check out those other documentaries. And Darcy, thank you very much. Get you back on when that new work's out as well.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.